I appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about one of the most important leadership abilities right now. That's not just for communication professionals, but for executives, nonprofit leaders, board members, anyone responsible for protecting organization credibility. We're all dealing with false information. And again, it's not just a communications issue, it impacts fundraising, public trust, employee morale, policy, partnerships, and reputation. So I hope by the end of the session, you'll have some practical tools that you can use immediately to recognize misinformation, respond strategically, and build resilience before your organization becomes a target. And as Danya mentioned, this session is recorded and you will receive a copy of the slides. A little bit about me. I've spent 2 decades leading purpose-driven communications. I've had the great privilege of working for Goodwill Industries International and the National Head Start Association. And in those roles, I managed major viral misinformation, disinformation situations that threatened our credibility and funding. And in addition to my day job, I have served on boards that have focused on this issue, Voices for Everyone through the Public Relations Society of America. I'm also a member of the Reagan Communications Advisory Board and was part of their Crisis Leadership Network. So this information, this topic is really important to me, both personally and professionally. And I always welcome you to connect with me. So I have my organization website on the slide and then my LinkedIn as well. So feel free to connect. So our roadmap for today, we're going to start by defining misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, because sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, even though they describe different problems. We'll examine why falsehoods spread so effectively, even when people have access to facts. We'll talk about unreliable information, including understanding our own biases. We'll also talk about when organizations should respond, and equally important when they shouldn't. And then finally, we'll focus on prevention because the communication strategy isn't always about moving fast. It's making sure you're trusted before a crisis or misinformation begins. So with terminology, misinformation is false information. It's shared without intent to deceive. Someone believes it's true and they pass it along. It's very innocent, but it has the potential to cause harm. Disinformation is intentionally false. Someone creates it or distributes it specifically to persuade public opinion or damage an organization. It's deliberately fabricated and designed to deceive and manipulate. And malinformation is different. The information itself is true, but it's weaponized. So examples would be the release of private emails, confidential information, or incomplete facts simply to cause harm to an organization. So this all matters for you because the response differs depending on intent. If someone unknowingly shares misinformation, education usually works. If you're dealing with coordinated disinformation, you're facing an organized campaign. So it's not a misunderstanding. Ultimately, the goal isn't always to convince people of one false story. It's to make people distrust everything. The bottom line is there are bad actors out there, as we know, and they are trying to corrode trust and make truth really exhausting to find. So these falsehoods, I say, are sticky because humans aren't always rational first. We're all guilty of that. We're emotional first. False narratives are engineered to be memorable. They're simple. They're emotionally charged. They're easy to repeat. And It's also the second reason is trust. People believe people they already know. So if it's a family member, a favorite podcaster, an influencer, often the messenger matters more so than the evidence. And then we also know that emotion overrides logic. So if something makes us angry, afraid, or outraged, our brains automatically become much less analytical. And so that's the continued influence effect. Research consistently shows that it sticks in our brain. So it has more of an impact of when you try to correct it after the fact. And that's why you, as leaders, have to really communicate consistently with human interest stories and facts before emotion really fills that vacuum. So, misinformation is everywhere. We tend to blame social media, and social media certainly accelerates falsehoods, but it didn't invent it. Rumors have always spread. We're all guilty of it around dinner tables, at sporting events, church parking lots, through email chains. Every nonprofit, association, and company is vulnerable because organizations depend on trust and people. Note the stats here. There are nearly 2 million nonprofits in the US. Every one of them could become the subject of misinformation. Additionally, nearly 60% of Americans have encountered misinformation. That stat comes from the Pew Research Center. So we're all guilty of sharing or saying something we thought was valid, and we often probably had innocent intent with it. But remember that falsehood is usually free, and that imbalance matters. A big part of this has also been AI. So artificial intelligence has dramatically changed this landscape. And I'm not saying that AI is bad. It's just has had an impact. So misinformation has spread through five mechanisms, especially in the last year. Social media algorithms are designed to prioritize attention over facts, to cause sensational, anger-inducing content to go viral much faster than nuanced, accurate information. So the speed in which it can travel is really key. It can spread the globe before a correction is written, and by the time journalists or experts investigate, verify, and publish the truth, millions of people have already seen and shared it. We know that AI can now convincingly replicate human likeness in speech. It's very scary. It makes it dangerously easy to create realistic looking fake videos, deep fakes, clone voices, fabricated quotes. And because this content perfectly mimics the real thing, it is becoming increasingly difficult for experts to distinguish genuine media from digital forgeries. And this means that when a famous person, like a celebrity, a politician, or an influencer, shares unverified information, their massive following makes the false claim look instantly true. And because people trust these figures, they accept the information as fact without taking time to do their own fact checking. And then there's the psychology of belief. It's human nature to hold on to a compelling narrative, especially if it confirms a person's existing biases. So when a correction is finally released, it is often ignored completely, leaving the facts at a massive disadvantage. And when people believe when they receive something from someone they know and trust, rather than an anonymous source, they're less likely to question its fidelity. Bots are also a problem. They can manufacture momentum. AI generates misinformation faster than humans can verify it. And the other thing I'll point out is that a lot of accurate information lives behind registration walls or paywalls. And this is especially true for media. So if you see, a Wall Street Journal article, for example, sometimes it's behind the subscriber wall. You can't access it. The same thing holds true for health researchers. So this is when AI can be used for good because it's scraping that information as sources. But if you're not putting that information out there in terms of your blogs or content on your website and it's hiding behind paywalls, it's really hard for people to find it. So that's why it's so important to be consistently updating your website and to make sure that you have evidence and human interest stories that are easier to find than a rumor. So there's a quick checklist that I recommend for leaders and I encourage you to use in terms of misinformation, disinformation. And it's to ask yourself, is this headline trying to inform me or provoke me? Does it cite real sources? Are stats presented honestly? Does it pressure me to act immediately? Does the outlet have a history of accuracy? Could this image actually be from another event? None of these alone prove something is false, but together they create patterns. So, digital discernment is often about recognizing patterns rather than catching individual mistakes. And one of the hardest truths is you're most vulnerable to misinformation that confirms what you already believe. That's why I encourage leaders to develop a gut check. So, whenever something triggers a strong emotional response, you pause, you ask, who benefits if I believe this? Can I verify it independently? Would I trust it if it supported the opposite position? I also encourage people to verify information and important claims through at least three credible independent sources. And it's really important for both yourself and your stakeholders to diversify your information sources, meaning that you should intentionally seek out news and viewpoints from a variety of different sources so that you're not trapping yourself in a closed loop where your existing beliefs are consistently repeated and reinforced without challenge. One of the biggest mistakes organizations make is feeling obligated to respond to everything. And it's kind of like a crisis. So you don't have to do that. Instead, you want to ask yourself three questions. Will your members, your teachers, your stakeholders expect you to say something? Could silence damage trust? So being silent is actually the worst thing that you could do. Is this narrative actually gaining momentum? Is it gaining traction? Sometimes false stories disappear naturally. So you want to be conscious of that. And then also being careful because sometimes organizations accidentally amplify a crisis or misinformation and give fuel to the fire. So you want to be careful not to do that. The decision to respond should be strategic and not emotional. And then you also want to look at resources like the Federal Trade Commission because they advise evaluating claims based on evidence and credible sources rather than relying on the status of the person who shared them. The other thing that you want to focus on is debunking. So, debunking with judgment. Before responding, understand how widespread the issue actually is. Social listening tools can tell you whether you're seeing a spark or a wildfire. Basically, has it spread? And I'll talk about some social listening tools in a few minutes. If you determine action is necessary, respond quickly with clear facts. Avoid repeating the false claim over and over. And whenever possible, let trusted leaders speak directly to audiences through video. So leverage your YouTube or leverage your LinkedIn to create videos. There are also two great fact-checking sites if you're not aware of them. One is Snopes and another is factcheck.org. So if you see something that is inaccurate and it's spreading, you can go there and post the rumor and the truth. And that can be used as your third-party validator for people searching whenever something is true or false. And if false information becomes intentionally Defamatory legal action may need to become part of your response strategy. As mentioned, monitoring is really critical and it doesn't require an enormous budget. So these are all hyperlinked for when you get a copy of the slide. You probably all know Google Alerts. It's great. These are all free monitoring tools that you should be using now to see what is being said about you, your leaders, your organization, your competition. Google Alerts is an easy starting point, so you can put all of that information in if you're not doing that. TalkWalker expands your visibility beyond Google's index. And then Buffer allows you to monitor engagement across your own channels. The other thing I'll point out is that most organizations only monitor the organization's names. So I recommend you monitor executive names, campaign names, major initiatives, and common misspellings as well. So the earlier you detect a narrative or misinformation, disinformation, the easier it is for you to manage. And then language also matters. So when people hear you're spreading misinformation, many become defensive immediately. Instead, you want to lead with facts. So try saying, here's what we know today, or here's what we've confirmed. It's also okay to admit uncertainty about something, to say, we're still verifying the information. That often builds more trust and credibility than pretending to have every answer. And an example of that you might remember during COVID is that scientific researchers faced significant criticism because they adopted really rigorous and authoritative stances rather than openly communicating the limitations of evolving data. Everything was moving in real time, as we know. And the feeling now is that had those researchers been a little more vulnerable and even admitted that they were still gathering the facts, there might not have been a lack of public trust when public health guidance frequently shifted. So that's one example. And again, it's okay to be vulnerable and admit that you don't know all the facts. Other things that you can do is you don't have to defend yourself alone. Seek out your trusted partners. They often carry more credibility than organizations speaking on their own behalf. So that's important to do. I would seek out those partners now and be thinking about who they are. Going back to our earlier conversation, debunking is reactive and pre-bunking is proactive. That's a big piece that you should be doing right now, knowing that a lot is being said about Head Start. So with pre-bunking, you're preparing your audiences before false information reaches them. If you know a controversial policy announcement is coming or anticipate attacks on your organization, you can educate stakeholders in advance. We all know that there is information, policy standards, restrictions that are potentially coming out about Head Start. And this is an opportunity for you to be proactively stating that Head Start's the only child care center in rural settings. You can talk about how it provides comprehensive care. You should be actively putting out that information. People who have already heard the truth about an organization are much less likely to believe any misinformation when it comes out there. And every hour that you spend preparing and putting out that information saves many hours responding later. This is a simple four-step process for pre-bunking. One is to anticipate the narratives most likely to emerge. So we have a sense of those now. We know the misconceptions that exist about Head Start. You can prepare your messages before they're needed. And that's something that I'm happy to be a partner with you on and craft and write those messages. You can inoculate your audiences by sharing accurate information early. Your audiences will then be less likely to listen to arguments or objections against your brand. And monitor continuously so you know if the conversation is changing. And from a practical website standpoint, if you haven't done this already, I would buy every domain that is out there that is a variation of your organization's name so no one else claims that as their own. Again, preparation dramatically reduces panic during times of crisis or misinformation. One fascinating body of research, and I have this hyperlinked at the end, is from the Annenberg School of Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. And they suggest that directly repeating misinformation, even to deny it, can unintentionally reinforce it. So they developed something called the bypass strategy, and this strategy avoids that trap. So instead, you begin with the truth that you want people to remember, support it with evidence, and share accurate information that bolsters that conclusion without repeating the false claim. Lead with positive impact and let the truth crowd out the falsehood, and use trusted messengers to reinforce it. So be thinking about your families, your influencers, alumni, researchers, community leaders, partners. They carry more weight than your talking head, than your leader, than institutions or organizations defending themselves. So the goal isn't to argue with every rumor. It's to fill the information environment with trustworthy content before falsehood gains traction. And I want you to lean into those trusted messengers, as I mentioned. So organizations are often their own least persuasive spokesperson. People trust other people, and that includes the audiences I mentioned before: parents, volunteers, clients, alumni, faith leaders, community partners, even former critics who now may feel differently about you, policymakers. Build those relationships before you need them. Collect stories now of alumni and parents that feel positively about you, with appropriate permissions, of course, but gain those stories, gather the quotes from them, develop your talking points now, and don't do this as a means to be reactive. Do all of this preparation now so that you can be proactive. I use the trust framework as a simple way to think about credibility. So, transparency, relationships, unity, speed, and a truth first culture. Credibility, as I mentioned, is not built during your crisis or during times of mis or disinformation. It's built every day through consistent behavior. Organizations that communicate honestly recover faster because they've accumulated trust over time. And I've seen that time and time again with crises. So you want to be sure that you're posting your financials, your beliefs, your principles, your third-party quotes. All of that is transparent on your website, and that you're consistently building relationships with media and with your community members. Unfortunately, sometimes leaders misjudge falsehoods. They think that misinformation is just a social media issue, that it's happening on TikTok or Facebook and it will go away. And the reality is, it spreads anywhere people communicate. Second, you should not label something as misinformation that rarely changes minds. Facts do, stories do, relationships do. So that's why I encourage you to really build a story bank if you're not doing that right now. Collect authentic stories from clients, staff, volunteers, and partners before you need them. Think about staff meetings or other types of meetings where you can have a mission moment shared or you hear things from your colleagues. It's really important to collect those human interest stories and have real stories of transformation because they build emotional credibility, they humanize your brand, and they build trust with stakeholders who have never visited your programs. Data with a human face demonstrates impact in ways that audiences remember and they share. So again, organizations that tell their truth consistently are far harder to misrepresent. And stories are your strongest defense because they're memorable, they build emotion and credibility. I have a whole toolkit on this with tips for how to gather those stories, and we'll share that as part of the recording and the slides. So I do want to leave you with these takeaways that digital discernment is now a leadership ability for everyone. You want to pre-bunk whenever possible. So you want to get those stories and facts and information out there. LinkedIn is a great tool for that because as leaders, you have the ability to build content and to post frequently, even monthly, with stories and ideas. You want to make truth easy to access. You want to choose language that invites dialogue rather than defensiveness. And you want to remember that credibility is your greatest asset. And every decision you make today either strengthens or weakens your ability to lead through tomorrow's misinformation challenge. There's also a number of resources that I use regularly. Again, these are all all hyperlinks so that you can look at these when you receive the slides. I mentioned Snopes and Fact Check. There's also PolityFact, that's great for verifying claims. TinEye helps verify whether images have been manipulated or taken out of context. The News Literacy Project is a DC-based nonprofit, so right here in my hometown, that offers outstanding educational resources, especially for schools and educational institutions. And then there are a number of reports on the right-hand side, white papers and research from Carnegie, from PricewaterhouseCoopers, the United Nations, the National Digital Roundtable, and other organizations for those who want to explore this topic more deeply. I do encourage you to take some time and read through those. And then there are a number of AI resources, and some of those probably go into the weeds, but there are several AI related tools that can help organizations better understand how they are discovering information and summarizing information. And these are not just technology tools, they're visibility tools. So as more people rely on AI instead of search engines, you and your organizations need to understand what AI can actually find out about them. And the more you're putting out information, the more likely AI systems are to surface accurate information instead of outdated or misleading content. So I do encourage you to look at them. It's really interesting, the AI Topic Explorer, the first link. If you put in your name, your personal name or your organization name, I was just playing around with that before this call, and it's very interesting what it pulls up. So I would encourage you to do that and just see what links are pulling up, if there's anything that you need to correct or update. But that's a great tool. And then I always say that I am your partner. So I appreciate you spending time with me. I will open it up to Q&A, but I am happy to partner with you on practical strategies, challenges that you're seeing in your organizations, real scenarios, any questions that you have. So please feel free to connect with me. I will put my email in the chat, but that's also my website and my LinkedIn. But please do reach out because I know that everyone is facing a lot right now. And I will open it up to Q&A.